What if I told you Prince Harry just made a desperate call to King Charles, begging for help to escape a marriage unraveling faster than anyone expected? The Montecito air was quiet that night, eerily quiet, except for the crunch of gravel beneath the tires of a blacked-out SUV pulling through the iron gates. Inside, Prince Harry sat alone in the living room of the sprawling mansion he once called a sanctuary. He looked tired, not physically, but spiritually, as if some part of him had already packed its bags and left. With the fireplace flickering behind him and the weight of the world collapsing on his shoulders, Harry reached for his encrypted phone. One number. Just one. His father's private line. He took a breath and hit call. Before we continue, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for updates. What followed, according to royal insiders, was not a casual father-son check-in. It was a desperate cry for help. The kind of call you make when you're not just exhausted, but emotionally cornered. And the person on the other end of the line? King Charles III, once a source of royal tension, now a lifeline to an embattled prince who had burned almost every bridge that once grounded him. According to a former royal aide, Harry's voice cracked barely 2 sentences into the call. "I can't do this anymore," he allegedly said. "She's not who she pretended to be. I feel like I'm losing myself, Dad." This wasn't the first sign of trouble, but it was the loudest, and it couldn't be ignored any longer. For months, perhaps years, cracks had begun to form beneath the surface of what the world was sold as a modern royal love story. A man who defied tradition and a woman who challenged the monarchy were supposed to be the architects of a new, liberated future. But behind the carefully curated Netflix specials, glossy magazine covers, and staged pap shots in California gardens, a darker narrative had begun to unfold. One marked by isolation, manipulation, and a slow, almost surgical severing of Harry from everything and everyone he once knew. At the center of it all is Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex and former American actress whose rise to royalty sparked both admiration and suspicion. Her transition from TV star to Duchess to global lifestyle mogul has been swift, strategic, and controversial. But now, with the Sussex marriage reportedly crumbling from within, questions are resurfacing, louder and more pointed than ever before. Was it love? Or a carefully plotted brand acquisition disguised as romance? Royal sources suggest that this phone call to King Charles may not have been the first cry for help, but it was the most direct, and it was allegedly triggered by a private argument that turned volcanic. A confrontation in which Meghan reportedly lashed out at Harry for attempting to reconnect with old army friends she had long since labeled toxic influences. According to one insider, she shouted, "You don't need them, you have me. That life is over." That wasn't just a passing comment. That was a line drawn in emotional concrete. This video unpacks everything, from Harry's increasingly erratic behavior and reported depression, to Meghan's behind-the-scenes tactics to isolate and control the narrative around him. We'll take you through shocking testimonies from palace staffers, friends who were cut off, and even insight from psychological experts who analyze emotional abuse in high-profile relationships. We'll also dive into what King Charles's next move could be, and whether or not Harry will be welcomed back into the fold or left to sink deeper into the storm he helped create. But before we get into the gritty details, let's rewind. How did we get here? Not long ago, Prince Harry stood as one of the most beloved members of the royal family. He was the cheeky, relatable younger brother to the dutiful heir. He served with distinction in Afghanistan, walked behind his mother's coffin as a child in a heartbreaking public spectacle, and built an international charity in Invictus. He was adored by the British public, by his peers, and most importantly, by the close-knit circle of friends he'd trusted since childhood. These were the same men who saw him through his mother's death, who laughed with him in the trenches, who celebrated and cried beside him. And one by one, Meghan pushed them all out. "They were just gone," said a friend who requested anonymity. "No fights, no fallouts, just silence. We tried calling, texting, sending birthday messages. Nothing. It's like he was locked behind a wall none of us could get through anymore." According to sources close to the family, this was not accidental, it was engineered. A systematic purge of old loyalties in favor of Meghan's inner circle, which now reportedly includes mostly PR consultants, stylists, brand advisors, and a tight crew of US-based image managers. That shift wasn't just social. It was psychological. By the time Harry released his memoir Spare, royal watchers noticed a version of him they barely recognized. He wasn't just bitter, he was broken. His revelations didn't feel like the catharsis of a man finally telling his truth. They read like the unraveling of someone desperate for meaning and identity. Stripped of his military titles, estranged from his brother, and now largely persona non grata in UK circles, Harry appeared increasingly adrift. This is why the late-night call to King Charles was so significant. It wasn't just about a marital dispute. It was a scream from a man who realized he had nowhere else to go. And sources suggest King Charles, known for his reserved demeanor and historical tensions with Harry, responded with surprising calm. "Come home, son," he reportedly said. "But only if you're ready to face what you left behind." And that's the question haunting the House of Windsor today. Is Harry finally ready to admit he made a mistake? Not just in leaving the royal family, but in the person he chose to leave with? As we dissect this developing saga in the chapters to come, we'll piece together the emotional puzzle of a royal prince who once had everything, only to find himself locked in a castle without a key. The world watched in awe as Harry and Meghan stepped down from their royal roles, imagining a fairy tale escape to freedom and reinvention. But the story that's unfolding now is anything but romantic. It's raw, it's painful, and if even half of what's being reported is true, it's tragic. Are we witnessing a personal awakening or a public unraveling? Has Harry finally reached the edge of the emotional cliff? And if he falls, who will catch him? Stay with us as we uncover the stunning details behind the royal phone call that could change everything. The hour was late in Montecito, the kind of night where silence doesn't comfort, it echoes. Inside the Sussex residence, the palatial estate that once symbolized freedom from royal restraint now resembled a fortress of emotional isolation. Prince Harry, once the vibrant rebel of the royal family, now stood at the edge of something far darker. The walls, once adorned with smiling portraits and brand visions, now seemed to close in. Every room felt bigger, colder, emptier. Every sound from Meghan, her footsteps, her tone, her silences, cut deeper. And so, he did something he hadn't done in over a year. He called his father. Sources close to the royal household say it happened around 2:37 a.m., California time. Harry had been up, pacing, agitated, emotionally volatile after what insiders describe as a heated argument with Meghan. She had allegedly confronted him over rumors that he had reconnected with one of his oldest army friends through encrypted social media. Meghan reportedly accused the friend of planting stories in the British press and berated Harry for endangering their brand by inviting toxic people back into his life. The phrase that set him off, according to those close to the scene, was delivered coldly. "They're not your family anymore. I am." For Harry, that wasn't reassurance. That was captivity. Within minutes, he was alone in his study, trembling, eyes red, and fingers hovering above the familiar contact name. Pa, a number he hadn't used except through official intermediaries. A number he once swore off. But tonight, he needed a voice from the past. Someone who still remembered who he used to be. On the other end, thousands of miles away in the early morning stillness of Clarence House, King Charles III reportedly sat reading a briefing. The line buzzed, and his private secretary rushed into the room. "It's Prince Harry, Your Majesty," he said cautiously. The king's face reportedly froze. Then he nodded, took the call, and dismissed the aide. "Harry," Charles said after a moment of heavy silence. "Is everything all right?" A pause followed, a heavy one. Then Harry's voice cracked through, raw and disarmed. "I don't know who I am anymore," he said, his voice reportedly distant and hollow. "I think I've made a mistake. I need help." What unfolded next wasn't just a phone call. It was a conversation layered in history, regret, pain, and the fragile threads of fatherhood long strained by royal duty. According to a former royal equerry familiar with the exchange, the conversation lasted over 28 minutes. It began awkwardly, hesitantly. Harry admitted he felt like a stranger in his own home, that he missed the grounding voices of his past, and that his relationship with Meghan had become a performance he no longer understood. "She controls everything," Harry allegedly said. "Who I see, who I talk to, even what I wear sometimes. I don't know where Harry ends and the show begins." Charles, known for his reserved emotional nature, was reportedly quiet for a long stretch. He didn't scold. He didn't rush. He listened. And then, In what insiders say was one of the most human moments between father and son in years, he said softly, "You are not alone, my boy. But you have to choose whether you want your life back." That sentence hit like a truth bomb. Royal observers believe this call marked a turning point, not just in Harry's emotional journey, but in the monarchy's private handling of the Sussex dilemma. Up until now, Buckingham Palace's strategy had largely been hands-off. Let them burn their own fire. But this call, this cry for help, shifted the temperature. This wasn't a strategic mistake being cleaned up. This was a son calling home. Insiders close to the king's inner circle confirmed that following the call, Charles immediately instructed his senior aides to draft a communication plan, not for public release, but for internal management. It included 3 options: a discreet mental health intervention, a monitored return to the UK under the guise of family healing, or, if necessary, a temporary legal inquiry into Harry's well-being and financial protection should the situation deteriorate further. Why such extreme measures? Because the king knows the stakes are higher than headlines. This isn't just a royal marriage crumbling. It's the slow psychological erosion of his youngest son on the world stage. And the monarchy cannot afford another public disaster of Diana-level proportions. According to a palace staffer familiar with the back-channel discussions, Charles reportedly confided to a close friend, "He's not well. He's hurting in ways I don't fully understand. But I'm not going to watch another Windsor spiral because we stood by and did nothing." But what led to this emotional breaking point? Was it just marital tension or something deeper? In the weeks prior to the call, Harry had been exhibiting signs of increasing detachment, according to those around him. He reportedly skipped meetings with Archewell staff, canceled scheduled interviews, and isolated himself even more than usual. Those close to the foundation say his once passionate involvement in their causes had dulled significantly. His responses became shorter, his appearance more disheveled. He stopped returning calls to mutual friends in the UK, even those who had been quietly loyal despite the rift. One of them told a reporter off the record, "It's like he's fading. Like the spark is gone." Behind the scenes, tension had been brewing in the household too. Meghan was ramping up her business ventures, focusing heavily on a new brand expansion into home goods and wellness. She was seen frequently meeting with PR agents, stylists, and producers. But according to those familiar with the family dynamic, she had grown increasingly frustrated with Harry's lack of energy and presence. One insider claimed Meghan said during a private event, "He's just so down all the time. I need him to pull it together. We're building something here." Her tone was allegedly not one of concern, but of inconvenience. And that's when Harry, emotionally depleted, picked up the phone to call the one man who might understand, even if he had never truly known how to show it. For King Charles, the call reportedly left him in a state of quiet reflection for hours afterward. He did not speak to Camilla immediately. Instead, he took a walk alone through the back gardens of Clarence House, hands in his coat pockets, deep in thought. According to a footman, the king didn't return inside until after sunrise. Meanwhile, Harry, after hanging up the call, sat still for nearly an hour. No staff entered the room. No sound. Just the soft tick of a grandfather clock echoing through the study. At 4:12 a.m., he emerged and reportedly told a household staffer, "I might be going back to London soon. Not permanently, not officially, but enough to see what was left. Enough to test whether the life he abandoned could ever welcome him back." And yet, one question lingers. Was this phone call an act of clarity or desperation? Because if there's one thing clear from this moment, it's this: Prince Harry is not okay. And for the first time since Megxit, he's finally said it out loud. Before the world knew her as the Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle was a Hollywood actress navigating the red carpets and tight circles of the entertainment industry. She was polished, ambitious, and strategic, someone who, according to those who knew her early on, valued relationships that advanced her position and image. But few could have predicted just how central control would become to her marriage with Prince Harry, not just over the public narrative, but over Harry's closest personal relationships. And fewer still expected how swiftly and thoroughly she would sever him from the life he once knew. When Prince Harry married Meghan in 2018, the wedding was presented as a romantic union of cultures and identities, a symbol of modernity entering the monarchy. But while the public celebrated, something much quieter and more insidious was happening behind the scenes. According to friends, former aides, and ex-military colleagues, Harry's friendships began to disappear. Not gradually, not from natural drifting, but almost like a switch had been flipped. One of the first casualties was Tom Inskip, known to friends as Skippy. He had been one of Harry's oldest mates, a fixture during the wild years in Las Vegas, the military deployments in Afghanistan, and the quieter moments at Highgrove and Sandringham. They shared more than memories, they shared loyalty. Skippy was there for Harry after his mother died. He was a brother in everything but blood. But shortly after the wedding, Harry's communication with him dropped off entirely. No explanation, no fallout, just silence. Insiders say Meghan considered Skippy a relic of Harry's chaotic past. He was reportedly the one who voiced concerns before the wedding, advising Harry to take things slower. That advice, according to sources, didn't sit well with Meghan. Some claim that after learning of the warning, she labeled Skippy as disloyal and jealous, and within weeks, Harry stopped inviting him to events. Even when Skippy and his wife were eventually invited to the royal wedding ceremony, they were reportedly snubbed from the intimate reception, an exclusion that signaled more than just oversight. This pattern didn't stop with Skippy. A growing list of longtime friends, especially those from Harry's Eton days and his military years, began noticing a cold distance. Calls went unanswered. Group chats went silent. One source close to the Invictus community recalled, "We used to have banter with him all the time. He was one of us. Then suddenly, he was unreachable, like he was under surveillance." Another friend, who served with Harry in Helmand Province, was blunter. "She didn't want us around. We saw the real him, the real life. That didn't fit her image." This wasn't just social distancing, it was strategic repositioning. According to a former Kensington Palace aide who transitioned with the couple briefly after their move to Frogmore Cottage, Meghan allegedly expressed clear preferences about the type of people she wanted around. She said once, "If we're going to redefine what royalty looks like, we need to be surrounded by people who reflect that, global thinkers, creatives, not just old polo buddies." That sentiment, while outwardly visionary, masked a more calculated effort to eliminate any connections to Harry's past that didn't serve the couple's media narrative. This reshaping of Harry's social sphere extended even into formal events. Royal insiders observed that by late 2019, Harry's guest lists were no longer reflective of his history. Events tied to military causes, charities, or even private celebrations were suddenly attended by Hollywood publicists, podcast producers, and US-based stylists. It felt like Meghan was building a firewall around him, said one former equerry. Only certain types of people could get through, and they were all loyal to her, not to Harry. This evolution, or erosion, of Harry's inner circle had consequences far beyond birthday parties and casual reunions. Experts in emotional wellness suggest that social isolation is often one of the first red flags in controlling relationships. When someone is gradually cut off from people who knew them well before the relationship, it becomes harder for them to recognize changes in themselves, says Dr. Julia Brenner, a psychologist specializing in trauma and relational abuse. They lose anchors, voices that can remind them of who they used to be or challenge unhealthy behavior. That isolation can create a distorted sense of reality. For Harry, the emotional fallout of this pruning began to show publicly. Interviews became more strained. His tone shifted from confident to defensive. During the Oprah interview, he described feeling trapped within the system, a statement that many believe also described his home life. Yet even as he voiced those feelings, there was no indication that anyone close to him from his old life had been consulted or reinvited into his confidence. One friend noted that when Meghan and Harry moved to the US, they hoped for a reset, but what actually occurred was a complete severing. That friend, who served with Harry in the British Army, recalled trying to reach out. "I sent him a message when his son was born. Nothing. Not even a thank you. That wasn't the Harry I knew." The impact of Meghan's alleged social control extended even into Harry's relationships with family. Prince William and Harry's well-documented estrangement wasn't simply about the institution. It was also deeply personal. Sources close to William said he was heartbroken not just by the public attacks on the family, but by how quickly Harry had distanced himself from everyone who once provided him emotional ballast. It was like he'd been erased and replaced, one royal courtier said. Even more troubling were accounts of how Harry reportedly began viewing some of his old friendships with suspicion, allegedly echoing Meghan's concerns. "She said they only liked me because I was a prince," he reportedly confided to a friend before cutting ties. "They don't get what I'm trying to do now." But was that really his voice? Or the echo of someone else's influence? The pattern continued into 2020 and 2021. Royal observers noted that for every former friend who disappeared from Harry's life, a new media handler or brand consultant entered it. Meghan was now fully immersed in curating their public image, strategically launching podcasts, documentaries, and product lines. Harry's role was often secondary, even reactive. While Meghan seemed energized by the spotlight, Harry began to look more withdrawn, more scripted. In late 2022, a former aide allegedly heard Harry express frustration during a private conversation about an upcoming interview. "Why do we have to keep telling our story? Can't we just live it?" he asked. The response from Meghan, according to the source, was icy, because the story is the brand. And the brand is everything. And in that moment, everything clicked. This wasn't just about reshaping Harry's relationships. This was about control over the very narrative of his life. The implications of this control are profound. If Harry no longer has access to the people who remind him of who he was, if the only voices around him are those who reinforce Meghan's version of events, then how can he be expected to form an objective view of his own reality? This isn't just emotional manipulation. It's identity engineering. Even now, attempts by former friends to reach Harry reportedly go unanswered. Some have tried to go through back channels, contacting former staff, trusted mutual acquaintances, even writing letters. But as of today, there is no known reconciliation. "We just want him to know we're still here," one of them said, "that he doesn't have to go through this alone." But perhaps the most painful irony is this. Harry once accused the royal family of controlling him, scripting his every move, and robbing him of autonomy. But in escaping that world, has he simply found himself in another palace with different walls, but the same locked doors? There is a difference between being alone and feeling isolated. Prince Harry, once surrounded by the laughter of lifelong friends, the structure of royal duty, and the grounding presence of military service, now finds himself in a far quieter world. One dominated by curated narratives, media contracts, and a carefully controlled environment in which his past identity no longer fits. What makes this isolation more complex is that it doesn't appear obvious to the outside world. From aerial shots of the Montecito estate to Netflix interviews, the illusion persists that Harry is thriving. But behind those high hedges, behind the lens of every photo shoot, lies something much more fragile, an emotionally isolated man who may be slowly disappearing into himself. Psychological isolation does not always involve physical distance. In Harry's case, it has been described as a progressive emotional collapse, one that accelerated after his departure from the UK but had roots long before. Those close to him trace it back to the years following his mother's death. At age 12, Harry lost not only a parent but also any illusion of a private life. Unlike William, whose role was clearly defined, Harry was the spare, a label that would haunt him well into adulthood. That role left him adrift, constantly searching for purpose, identity, and stability. In the army, Harry found a temporary anchor. Life in uniform offered him discipline, camaraderie, and anonymity. Among soldiers, he was Captain Wales, not a prince, not a tabloid target, but just another man in the trenches. Those years were some of the few where Harry seemed emotionally grounded. He had structure. He had belonging. He had friends who didn't care about palace protocols. But when he left the military in 2015, that sense of purpose began to erode. By the time Meghan entered his life, he was already standing on a fault line, searching for direction, craving stability, and vulnerable to influence. Meghan provided what looked like a new compass. In her, he saw a modern woman with global appeal, strong convictions, and a shared disdain for traditional constraints. She gave him the sense of rebellion he had always flirted with but never fully embraced. She offered clarity in a life that had grown murky. But over time, as multiple sources have suggested, that clarity came with conditions, emotional dependence, reshaped priorities, and eventually, isolation. One of the most telling signs of this isolation is the dramatic shift in Harry's body language over the years. In early public appearances with Meghan, he seemed relaxed, often leading her through crowds with familiarity and confidence. But as time went on, that dynamic changed. Meghan became more visibly dominant in interviews and engagements. Harry, by contrast, appeared more guarded, often deferring to her, his hands clasped tightly in front of him, his gaze downward. Body language experts have pointed to this as indicative of emotional suppression, when an individual retreats inward to preserve peace or avoid confrontation. This theory is reinforced by accounts from former staff who worked with the couple. One private staffer who briefly worked in Montecito described Harry as quiet, polite, but emotionally distant, like someone always walking on eggshells. Another reported that Harry would often retreat to his own wing of the house during disagreements, preferring silence over confrontation. He wasn't angry, the source said. He just looked defeated. In private meetings with Archwell executives, Harry reportedly struggled to assert his opinions. According to internal leaks, Meghan frequently took control of creative direction and media strategy, often shutting down ideas that didn't align with her personal brand goals. Harry would agree publicly, but sources claim he later expressed private doubts. He wanted to do more with veterans, said one former associate. He cared deeply about it, but it kept getting sidelined for content that had more commercial appeal. This lack of agency extended to personal decisions as well. From what to wear on public outings to how to respond to royal controversies, Harry was increasingly reliant on Meghan's counsel. And while partnership and collaboration are hallmarks of a healthy marriage, friends began to notice that Harry wasn't just compromising, he was disappearing. Former friends have spoken out quietly over the past year, noting that Harry no longer resembles the man they knew. One described him as muted, another as robotic. In particular, his withdrawal became more evident following the release of his memoir, Spare. While the book painted Harry as vulnerable and unfiltered, insiders say the experience of reliving his traumas in such a public way left him emotionally drained. It was supposed to be healing, said one source, but it just made him feel more exposed. Even his relationship with the press, once combative but somewhat controlled, has become increasingly volatile. Harry's interviews fluctuate between defensiveness and forced optimism. His eyes often betray a weariness that words cannot mask. One therapist who analyzed his Oprah interview noted, "There's a disconnect between what he says and what he shows. He speaks of liberation, but his body language screams fatigue." Isolation has also reshaped Harry's perception of family. Once inseparable from William, the rift between the brothers now runs deep. While public statements maintain a veneer of civility, private accounts suggest the damage is profound. Friends close to William say he has tried multiple times to reconnect, only to be met with silence or rejection. Harry, meanwhile, has expressed a sense of betrayal, not just over perceived slights, but over the institution he claims failed to protect him. But the deeper issue, according to royal insiders, is not just the feud. It's that Harry has no one left to balance his perspective. With old friends gone, family estranged, and new advisors loyal to Meghan's brand direction, he exists in a feedback loop. His world is curated, his conversations filtered, and his memories contested. Even the children, Archie and Lilibet, have become part of this emotional gridlock. Harry is said to be a devoted father, but there are quiet concerns from extended family about the environment in which he's raising them. Not because of safety, but because of emotional weight. He carries pain like a second skin, said one royal cousin. And it seeps into everything, how he speaks, how he moves, how he raises his voice only when he's desperate. The question many now ask is whether Harry recognizes the extent of his isolation. Some believe he does, and that the phone call to King Charles was a moment of clarity. Others fear he remains trapped in a psychological maze, unsure of which voices to trust and which memories are real. Emotional isolation doesn't need to be dramatic. It can be quiet, subtle. A series of silences that accumulate over time until you wake up and realize you haven't heard your own thoughts in years. That is the space Prince Harry appears to be occupying, a psychological fog where even escape seems like betrayal. For now, he remains in Montecito. The press releases continue. The photo ops persist. But beneath it all, behind the carefully timed smiles and scripted sound bites, is a man increasingly adrift, cut off from the anchors of his past, and unsure of what, or who, can bring him back. The Meghan Markle who first stepped into the royal spotlight was presented to the world as a fresh breeze in a centuries-old institution. American, biracial, articulate, philanthropic, she was the woman who could help modernize the monarchy. She spoke with poise, leaned into progressive ideals, and radiated confidence. But as years passed and the glossy exterior of the Sussex fairy tale began to peel, what emerged beneath was a more divisive figure, one whose carefully managed image now stood in stark contrast to a growing public skepticism. The transformation didn't happen overnight. At first, Meghan's public persona was overwhelmingly positive. Her engagement interview with Prince Harry was met with international warmth. Her humanitarian work in Rwanda, her passion for female empowerment, her self-described identity as a global citizen, all helped cement a reputation that resonated with millions. She was the woman who broke boundaries, who brought modern values into an ancient crown. But somewhere along the way, the tone shifted, from admiration to accusation, from inspiration to unease. Observers pinpoint the earliest cracks around the time of the couple's wedding in 2018. While the public marveled at the ceremony's cultural significance and emotional moments, insiders whispered about behind-the-scenes tension. Reports emerged that Meghan had made Kate Middleton cry during a rehearsal. Then came stories of staff resignations, one after another, including senior aides who cited unworkable conditions. Palace insiders began referring to Meghan, in hushed tones, as Duchess difficult. At the time, these stories were dismissed by supporters as either rooted in racism or resistance to change. But patterns eventually speak louder than spin. What Meghan presented to the public was always polished. Interviews were carefully timed. Statements were strategically released. Social media narratives were guided with precision. But as she and Harry began to distance themselves from the royal family, Meghan's persona shifted from that of a reformer to that of a victim. In the Oprah interview, she described feeling unsupported, suicidal, and silenced. The world was shocked. Sympathy poured in. And yet, as time passed, contradictions began to emerge. Some of Meghan's claims were publicly disputed. Palace records reportedly contradicted key elements of her testimony, particularly her accusation that she had been denied help for mental health struggles. Journalists dug deeper into timelines and events, revealing inconsistencies in how Meghan described certain experiences. The press, once cautiously admiring, now turned critical. What was real? What was dramatized? Was this woman being persecuted, or was she shaping a story to suit a narrative? The Netflix documentary Harry and Meghan was another turning point. Marketed as an intimate, unfiltered look into the couple's life, it came off to many as curated and overly controlled. Critics noted how every scene felt orchestrated, how emotional moments appeared rehearsed. Meghan's storytelling began to follow a repetitive structure. She was misunderstood, attacked, wronged, and always on the right side of history. Yet with each repetition, public interest began to dull. Viewers who once saw her as a beacon of modern royalty now saw a figure constantly immersed in drama, seemingly unable to exist without crisis. More telling, however, were the subtle visual shifts in Meghan's public image. Early on, she leaned into modest, accessible fashion, neutral tones, sustainable brands, minimalist jewelry. But as she transitioned into her American rebranding, her style grew increasingly high fashion, aspirational, and curated for magazine spreads. This wasn't inherently problematic, but it contradicted the narrative of wanting privacy and simplicity. The more she spoke of being hounded by the media, the more she posed for elite photographers. The more she claimed to be fleeing public life, the more she positioned herself at the center of media cycles. This dichotomy, between victimhood and calculated exposure, has fueled much of the public's confusion. Meghan has often spoken about being silenced, yet she has also given more interviews in 5 years than most royals do in their entire public service. Her voice is everywhere, in podcasts, in columns, on television, in books, and on stages. She has framed herself as the unheard woman finally speaking out, but has made a career of never being out of earshot. Former staff members have noted that Meghan has an extraordinary understanding of image management. One aide recalled, every time a major negative headline was about to break, Meghan would suddenly schedule a podcast release or drop new photos with the kids. She knew how to redirect the conversation with military precision. Another insider stated that Meghan was obsessed with Google alerts, often monitoring how she and Harry were trending and adjusting their public statements accordingly. Perhaps the most damning insight came from someone who once worked in the couple's PR orbit. Meghan doesn't just manage her image. She believes in the image she's created. She doesn't see contradiction. To her, every narrative twist serves a greater mission, protecting the brand of Meghan Markle. That brand has become increasingly commercial in recent years. From children's books to luxury partnerships, trademark filings to lifestyle brands, Meghan's name has evolved from a royal title to a global trademark. The launch of her lifestyle initiative, rumored to rival Gwyneth Paltrow's Goop, further cemented her pivot from duchess to entrepreneur. But even that venture hasn't been without controversy. Critics question whether the very royal identity she once claimed to reject is now being exploited for commercial value. How does one speak of escaping royal life while using a duchess title to promote candles, cooking kits, and organic teas? What complicates matters further is the emotional dissonance between Meghan's public declarations and reported private behavior. Staff turnover at her and Harry's foundation, Archewell, has been unusually high. Several employees have reportedly left due to workplace toxicity and unclear leadership structure. One former team member stated, "It wasn't just pressure. It was instability. One day we were strategizing humanitarian goals. The next we were planning Meghan's next media rollout. There was no consistency. Just agenda." All of this has had a ripple effect on Meghan's likability. Public opinion polls show a steady decline in her favorability ratings, particularly in the UK, but increasingly in the US as well. Former allies in Hollywood have begun to distance themselves, reportedly frustrated by her unpredictability and control over joint projects. One executive involved in a short-lived development deal with her called the experience like navigating a minefield of shifting moods and impossible expectations. Despite these challenges, Meghan remains resilient, some would say relentless, in her quest to dominate the narrative. But the question remains, at what cost? Harry's growing emotional distance and apparent disillusionment with their shared projects have raised further questions. In interviews, he appears disengaged, his passion less visible, his voice often subdued. Whether this is a result of stress, depression, or a shift in his values remains unclear, but Meghan's unwavering focus on public messaging has continued unabated. Supporters argue that Meghan is simply a strong, ambitious woman navigating an inherently sexist and racist media landscape. They point to the double standards applied to her compared to other royals. Detractors argue that her ambition has turned into manipulation, that she uses social justice language to mask personal branding efforts. Both may contain some truth. Meghan Markle is undeniably complex, intelligent, driven, and media-savvy. But the Meghan of today is not the same woman who once stood before the world in a white coat beside Prince Harry, glowing with sincerity and humility. She has evolved into a figure of sharp contrasts, publicly open, privately controlling, emotionally expressive, strategically guarded, a storyteller, but also a gatekeeper of which stories get told and how. Whether this changing persona is a natural response to years of pressure or a calculated shift in pursuit of influence, the result is the same. Meghan Markle has become one of the most polarizing public figures of the decade. Loved by many, distrusted by others, but impossible to ignore. And in this relentless redefinition, something vital may have been lost, not just public trust, but a connection to authenticity. Because in the race to control the narrative, Meghan may have inadvertently built a brand so perfectly manicured that even her husband, and perhaps she herself, no longer knows where the story ends and the real person begins. Montecito, California, the name evokes images of sunny beaches, luxury estates, and a retreat for the rich and famous. For Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the sprawling property they purchased here was meant to be their sanctuary, a refuge from the intense glare of royal life and tabloid scrutiny. But behind the manicured gardens and pristine walls, sources reveal that the estate quickly became less a sanctuary and more a pressure cooker, a gilded cage where emotional tension simmered and relationships strained under the weight of expectation. When the Sussexes arrived in Montecito in early 2020, it was with promises of a new beginning. They sought privacy, creative freedom, and a life less governed by protocol. The media called it a fresh start, a fairy tale rewritten on American soil. Yet insiders who have spent time in the household describe a far different reality, one filled with constant work, heightened stress, and a daily battle to maintain the image of unity. The sheer scale of the estate, spanning multiple acres with lavish amenities, created both physical space and emotional distance. While some found solace in its vastness, others felt isolated by the sprawling rooms and separate wings. According to former staff members, Harry and Meghan often kept different schedules, and it was not unusual for them to spend long periods apart within the same house. This physical separation echoed the growing emotional divide reported by close associates. Tensions were reportedly compounded by the constant demands of managing their sprawling public and private projects. Archewell, their nonprofit organization, was envisioned as a platform for social change, but early reports indicated internal confusion and mismanagement. Staff turnover was high, and daily operations were often chaotic. One former employee described the atmosphere as high pressure, disorganized, and emotionally draining, with deadlines looming and decisions often deferred to Meghan, who was heavily involved in the branding and media strategy. Adding to the pressure was the relentless media spotlight. Even in California, the Sussexes were not free from paparazzi, social media speculation, and tabloid rumors. Meghan's historic battles with British tabloids had followed her across the Atlantic, and in some ways intensified as she and Harry became staples of American entertainment news. Every outing, every statement, every social media post was analyzed, criticized, and sensationalized. Managing this constant scrutiny required a level of vigilance that insiders say contributed significantly to household stress. In interviews, Harry has alluded to feeling overwhelmed by the relentless attention. In private moments, friends say he expressed nostalgia for the days when his life was less public, when camaraderie and simple pleasures filled his hours. But in Montecito, such moments were fleeting. The pressure to perform a carefully scripted public persona often overshadowed private joys. The couple's social circle in Montecito also added complexity. Unlike the close-knit group Harry had in the UK, army friends, childhood companions, and longtime family allies, their California acquaintances were often part of the entertainment and celebrity world. While glamorous, this circle brought its own set of expectations, insecurities, and social politics. Navigating these new relationships, while maintaining ties to a distant royal family, added layers of stress and identity conflict. Moreover, reported disagreements over financial management and philanthropic priorities intensified domestic strains. Some sources suggest that Harry was frustrated with Meghan's emphasis on branding and media projects over traditional charitable work. Meanwhile, Meghan reportedly felt the need to protect their joint vision from external criticism and interference, which she perceived as a threat to their brand's integrity. Amid this backdrop, small conflicts reportedly escalated quickly, exacerbated by the high stakes of their shared life. Staff members recount episodes of tension where a minor disagreement about schedules or social media content would trigger hours of silence or visible distress. The pressure cooker environment left little room for vulnerability or open communication, leading to emotional distance and unresolved resentments. Some close to the couple have expressed concern about the impact of this environment on their children, Archie and Lilibet. While both parents are described as loving and attentive, the household's emotional climate reportedly influenced the atmosphere in which the children were raised. Experts warn that high-pressure environments can have lasting effects on young children's emotional development, especially when parental stress is pervasive. Despite these challenges, the Montecito estate has also been a site of hope and possibility. Private moments of joy, family milestones, and quiet reflection have punctuated the tension. However, the balance between sanctuary and pressure cooker remains delicate and uncertain. The Montecito chapter of Harry and Meghan's story illustrates the complex interplay between public life and private reality. It reveals how a place designed for escape can become a crucible of emotional strain when the pressures of fame, family, and ambition collide. As we continue to follow their journey, the question remains, can this pressure cooker environment be transformed into a true home, or will it further unravel the fragile fabric of their relationship? As the days and months unfolded within their Montecito home, Prince Harry found himself increasingly confined, not just by physical walls, but by emotional boundaries. Friends close to the couple describe a growing restlessness in Harry, a desire to reconnect with pieces of his past life that felt genuine and grounding. These attempts, however, were met with resistance and, some say, outright hostility from Meghan.